What's happened to me in the last few months is that that I've realized what Holochain actually is. There's been some kind of contextualization that has made it possible to understand it in a new light, or a bigger with a bigger frame. So originally we called it a distributed web application environment. You don't want to use platform because platform makes you think you're running on some proprietary platform, but it's a way to be able to create distributed web applications, which of course is true, but that's not actually the it's not consequential. It doesn't actually indicate the import of the thing that is. Like you could say a car is a way to get from here to there, but that doesn't tell you the import of a car over a horse. Like there's a different thing that makes that be important. And so this is me landing what is the import. And the import goes like this. It's it it's the import is about the kind of framework that it is, and it falls into a class of other capacities that have been created, in which the cost to deliver the value of the capacity drops to near zero, or drops to zero per unit, and is just embedded in the infrastructure. So that's the abstract way. It is a kind of capacity that's delivered in which the cost drops to near zero or zero per unit, and is embedded in just having the infrastructure around. And so in a sense, it feels like it's free. So what are the examples? That's abstract. The examples are, well, frankly, the internet. So what the internet did is it dropped the cost of sending a piece of data from one place to another to near zero. It removed the per message cost to zero. And this was a deliberate decision. So there were global networks that spanned the globe before. The airlines built them for doing all of their transactions and being able to do that. But every packet had a billing field in it. And so they could track how much to charge and pay for the messages. And when you remove that, you create a different reality. Whenever you make something basically free, there's a different reality that shows up around it. Now, the internet isn't enough. There's another part of this pattern. The internet itself, the IP protocol, as it was called, the internet protocol that doesn't include billing in the packet delivery and the message delivery from one point to another point, because you and me couldn't do that. Well, maybe I could, because I'm a computer science guy, right? So I could write code and I could actually get my packets to another person without not having to pay per packet. You couldn't have, most people couldn't have. But what happened was there was another level built on top of IP, built on top of a couple of other things. There's a couple extra protocols that were added using the capacity of the packet delivery mechanism of the internet protocol. And that thing is a household word. It's called email. So that, and it was also like the IP protocol, like the internet, it was free. It was an open protocol. Anybody could use it. It was not enclosed by somebody who had the intellectual property or had a central place that all the messages went through, so they could gate it and charge. So that's transformational. And we know it's transformational because of what actually happened with things like AOL and Genie and all of these other services that gave you access to the internet. Really, what they were giving people access to was email, because that's what people most cared about. All of a sudden, they could send messages to their grandchildren, to their relatives in another country, whatever. That was the key thing that those services added. So this is an important part in telling the story, right? There's this capacity that's added. A price is dropped to zero. Technically, a price is dropped to zero or near zero, not just technically, but for end users, for regular people, for non-technical people. And then there are the companies who add more value around that capacity that is not embodied or is not free inside that capacity. So what they do, one in the case, one of the things they do is they make things easy. Great value. That's what AOL really did, is it made it really easy to get on the internet. Even some of the other things like Genie and those other ones, it wasn't that easy. The user interfaces were clunky. It was hard to understand. It looked very techy and so on. So ease of use is one added value that comes and is always added around, and people can charge money for ease of use. But the second thing that that AOL did is they realized, oh, we can provide content. And we can charge companies to provide content to the people who we've sold the access to be able to get email. So those people are no longer paying per email. They're paying us a monthly fee, an infrastructure fee. And all of a sudden we can add value by getting content into this space. Well, now we're watching the evolutionary pressure that ends up happening here. What happens is that notion of content delivery itself underwent this same pattern of evolutionary pressure to have the price go down to zero by adding an open protocol. And that's what we know of as the web. And part of the story of this is so interesting is to me is that AOL thought they were a content company, and they got so rich that they were able to purchase Time Warner, which was a content company, right? They had all this content, and AOL wanted to be able to deliver that content on their proprietary network with their enclosed audience, and they thought they were going to win because of that, and they were completely wiped out as a content delivery company. They're still around because they were agile enough to pivot and realize, no, we just are going to still sell people email addresses and provide that value well. But they were a huge company, and now they're a small company in comparison. And so now let's jump to the second example, the web. So again, what was the web? It's you take the internet and you add a set more of protocols on top of that. HTTP, which everybody knows, they see that in their URLs, HTTP, the Hypertext Transfer Protocol. And that protocol, along with another thing that people are familiar with, HTML, the Hypertext Markup Language. It's a transport and content. Those things together made content delivery be something that was technically feasible and open and basically free. As long as you had a computer, you could be a publisher if you had the technical know-how to be able to set up a web server and create HTML documents. But basically, the same process of dropping the price to zero per publication. Once to zero, so you can have infinite publication. So then we have the next phase of this, just like we had the first phase. Remember, IP to email, HTTP, HTML, the early web, where all the techies were able to start doing this stuff. And then you jump to Web 2, where really publishing takes over, where the capacity to publish, where you have Drupal and things like WordPress and all these services that are websites that make it easy for people to use this capacity to publish. And some of it is open source. So there's a lot of complexity here about the free and not free. Again, if you make it easy, you can charge for making it easy. So you can pay to be installing the software. There's lots of levels of thinking about this. There's you pay a website access for them to help you publish things, or you buy a copy of Dreamweaver that helps you make HTML pages instead of having to type them out like a coder. So there's all kinds of these evolutionary pressures, but you're paying for Dreamweaver, or you can use the open source one. So there's all kinds of interesting dynamics that go on. But the point here of the story is this evolutionary pressure of the adding of new open protocols. And what happens because people discover things that are valuable within the context of that protocol. Now, what I want to say is the most valuable thing that has shown up or maybe I shouldn't be so absolutist, an incredibly valuable thing that has shown up as being enabled, but not part of the protocols, is what I want to call group forming, or the ability to create a group that operates and plays a certain way together, which the experience of that is what we might call collaboration. space, a collaboration space. That capacity is not built into HTTP, HTML, into the web protocols, and it is what the big companies have harnessed and are providing us. So Facebook provides a place for a group to form and share not just messages, but have a way to be together. Google Suite is probably one of the biggest ones, where you have file sharing, document editing, spreadsheets, email, and storage. Google Suite, those things are an incredibly powerful way to be together as a group, and Google can charge enterprises just out the wazoo for that amount of that quality. Now, it's interesting when you think about costs. Now we get into this question of cost. Not all costs are monetary. In the case of this group sharing capacity that is provided to small groups, not enterprises, the cost that you pay is becoming a product for advertisers. And that's a significant cost. And you also bear the cost of what Cory Doctorow calls enshittification, right? Because what happens is you get something that's awesome, and then they figure out how to make it less and less awesome and charge you more and more money by saying, oh no, you only have a month's worth of data before you have to start being a paid customer. Oh no, you're going to see more and more advertising before you have to, whatever. And so this other cost that you pay is a degradation of cost, or you pay the cost of lock-in, that it's hard to get your data out and into another place. So not just monetary costs that happen, that have been, that are being paid because there's no open protocol for group forming. That is what Holochain is. Holochain is an open protocol for collaborative group forming networks. And it reduces the cost of doing that at the technical level down to zero. You no longer need to have web servers in the middle. You don't have to know how to set up a big a server farm and run that stuff. It's like, it is a way of having the infrastructure itself whole that we all have work differently, such that you no longer have to pay that cost of setting up infrastructure in the middle. So Holochain does exactly the same thing that email did for messaging, and what the web did for content sharing, it does to group forming. Brings the cost down to zero or near zero. Now, there's one more step, the usual one. It does so, Holochain does so in a way that's really, it's available to technical users, right? You can easily, if you are a web developer, of which there are millions on the planet, you can build a Holochain application and you have your nice little collaborative environment that doesn't require any infrastructure other than the people who are using it, and is not enclosed by a central company. But to build one of these, you have to be a web developer. And basically Holochain it's that low level thing. It's like it does the thing for one group. I mean, you can create thousands of groups, right? But in the same way that the packet is a generalized way to deliver packets in the IP level to any place, an email is a specific kind of packet with something that makes sense. It's got a subject and a body. It's got different, you can format your messages with bold and other things. You can put images into there. That whole way of additions that were added onto the packet protocol, same thing is needed for Holochain. So the next level, the thing that makes Holochain accessible, is the Weave. And the Weave takes this notion of being able to form groups, small collaborative groups, a network that can collaborate around typing in the same document, like a Google Docs. That is, you can basically think of that as a group that is agreed to play by the rules of how to edit a document. You could also create a group that is playing chess tournaments, and included in the coherence of forming the group network, that group, the ability to form a network, a group of people who can coherently understand what it is to play a chess tournament and have chess encoded in there, that would be another group. You could create another group that's about coming to alignment, doing decision-making in the group, voting or consensus with different types of agreements, or sociocracy. And that could be encoded in a tool that's usable. So that whole capacity to think about how not just a simple group doing one thing together, the rules of a game for one group, that network that's formed, but the complexity of humans when they form groups. When we think of humans forming groups, it's really social fabric that's created. And there's lots of little groups and lots of different rule sets that we're playing by. So human groups are groups that include, and I don't have the words quite right yet for this, but I want to jump from forming a small group unit to forming social fabric, which weaves together different types of social contracts. So maybe the way to think about it is Holochain enables the creation of small social contracts, and the weave allows the creation of social fabric, of weaving together lots of these social contracts, because there's a typology of social contracts that actually is really important to understand the difference between. Like one of them is the kind of social contract that's about membranes, about becoming a member of a group and who you are in the group and what your identity is in the group. That's one set of rules of the game to be part of a group. And you can create a Holochain group, a Holochain network that represents that part. And you can assemble that with the other parts of being part of a human group, which is, what do we do together? Well, we play chess. We do project management. We edit documents. We do budgeting. We do spreadsheets. We do voting. Those are all like functions of what we do together, not who we are together. And finally, the other part of social fabric that the weave weaves together is those kinds of groups that are cross-membrane groups. So these are like higher level groups, which would be things like, I don't know, think about knowledge itself. Think about Wikipedia. This kind of thing, the sources of knowledge or the sources of the tools themselves are stored in libraries. Those are things that the weave allows you to hold as a cross-level group. And I'm just saying this because it's part of the typology of weaving social fabric together. And the weave creates an API, an open protocol for being able to compose all of these little groups that are made possible by Holochain in a way that end users can do. And again, without any enclosure, without that being locked in, because the price of doing that is dropped to zero. It just becomes available. That's the big story. Technical term is transclusion. So this is another thing that, in looking back at the history of how these things developed, we see that, so this is, I can tell it as a story too, it's kind of fun. If you think about that stage of content sharing, like, you know that content sharing is a thing that we want to be able to do, because all of a sudden sending packets from one place to the other is free. So sending a message, having a conversation, that's the first thing. Hi there, hello. That's the first kind of content you want to share. And then you realize, no, document sharing, right? The web is all about document sharing. That's larger chunks of content. But there was a couple other protocols that were invented before and lived for a long time and are still actually used. Well, one of them is not used anymore. I don't know if, do you remember Gopher servers? So Gopher was like the web, but instead of being a document, a full page document, it was just lists of resources. It was like a list. It was like an outline list. But the thing that it had is that you could click on one of these and it would take you to another list, right? So it had this notion of linking from one resource to the other. The web did this incredible thing. One of the incredible component parts of the web was HTTP, HTML. We already talked about those two, but the URL, the Universal Resource Locator, as being something that was included in the format, so that you could have hyperlinks between one document and the next one. That pattern of linking together the fabric, the information fabric, rather than the social fabric. So we're getting to this. The weave also includes. The weave has something that's like the URL, but we call it the weave asset locator instead of the universal resource locator, because in each one of these tools that we were talking about, each one of these little Holochain groups that you can create, or one of these groups that you can create that has a function that's built using Holochain as its underlying technology or capacity. Well, in each one of those, you have these assets that are created, information assets, kind of like a document in the web, but you can think about it like this. If, like, let's say we're talking about a Kanban board where you're doing project management, and in Kanban boards you have your columns and you have your cards in the Kanban board. Well, you can think of the whole board as an asset. It is something that you want to be able to refer to in another place. But you can also think of the card as being an asset that you would like to be able to refer to in another place. So you can refer to it with a URL. But in the Weave, because of a bunch of properties of the way Holochain is designed, and because of the fact that it's not enclosed, it's not, it isn't something that is owned on other people's servers, because it is a thing that is held in common by the people who are using it. That's the reason why what I'm going to say is possible. Those assets, you can actually take them and you can transclude them. You can make them be visible inside other spaces. So it means I can take a text document and be typing in my text document, and then I can drop in the Kanban card right in there and have it be transcluded inside that place. And I can actually edit the Kanban card in there. Or if you want, let's say we have another application that does like a stickies board where you're doing your retro and you put your stickies up. Well, you can put the Kanban card directly in the sticky. Or you might take the whole stickies board and stick it in a document. Or you might have something that looks like a big whiteboard where you can draw diagrams and stuff, and you can drop in documents and spreadsheets and whatever part from any other part of your Weave groups. That's part of the weaving. So it's weaving at the social level, but also at the asset level. So if you think about how that works with Slack and how that works with Miro, each one of these companies is doing an integration and making sure that the integration works. And they have a whole place where they're trying to get people to create APIs. And then typically that's also the thing that you pay for. You pay for integrations because that's a place where they gotcha. You wanted to do that? Well, you got to pay for that part. That's not the part that comes free. Well, it's reasonable. It's totally reasonable that they would charge for it because that kind of integration has super, super high value. But there's another part of what the Weave just drops the price down to zero for. That kind of integration also is just native and free because it belongs to the open protocol rather than belongs to a service where Slack or Miro is doing all the work to do the integration and connecting with the other servers. Like it's real work. I'm not denigrating it. It's just part of what happens is that it's possible to drop those costs down to zero and then new things happen as a result. Well, I'm going to give you an example of the thing that's actually already happening. So this is not an imagined example. It's a real thing that's being done right now in MOS. Just to name it. So just like web browsers give you access to the web, and there's a bunch of web browsers, Edge and Firefox and Chrome, I'm assuming that there are going to be lots of what we like to call a frame for the Weave. And the first one we just call MOS because I like the notion of the surface area. MOS has so much surface area, and I see this as surface area for social organisms to grow and thrive on, or surface area for growing social fabric, thrivable social fabric. So the first frame for the Weave is MOS. And so in MOS, we have a bunch of tools that are already implemented. You can do Zoom, you can do the equivalent of Zoom chat, what we're doing right here. And you can do spreadsheets and documents, and you can do files, and you can do chat, and you can do games, and there's a bunch of different things that we can do. They're not super mature, but they're pretty cool, and you can do it. So there's one group that has been developing something that I think is really important. It's about supply chain management using a different kind of accounting tool than what we normally think of as double entry bookkeeping. There's this form of accounting that was developed quite a while back that's called REA, Resource Agent Event Accounting, that instead of being focused on the enterprise, because double entry bookkeeping is focused on a single enterprise, you get to see what the assets and the transactions in the ledger, and you can create coherence in your organization with double entry bookkeeping. This is organized around doing a supply chain accounting, or basically the whole environment, the value flow accounting across a whole network of people who want to be of basically organizations that want to be in relation to each other around resources and events and different types of actors. And so in New York State, there's this group called the Carbon Farm Network, which is running supply chain management um, for fiber, for wool, all the way from its production by small producers in New York State, all the way to the consumer, to the producers who are doing sweaters and building, designers who are sourcing the exact kind of fiber that they want for doing the specific kinds of sweaters that they want to build. And so there is an application that uses this form of accounting, and the whole point is it's an ecosystem space to do that. So what can they do? Well, imagine if they had to be a big company that was producing a web application that had this new accounting function in it. Well, they would have to go and probably add in all of the stuff about, they would have to write software to do user accounts and to do being able to send messages back and forth between the different users, not just the accounting part. They would have to have all this other infrastructure, which is what happens. Any decent web application is a reinvention of all kinds. Like, how many different places have you typed in comments that are a different type of commenting? Because each app has its own commenting function. Well, they would need to do that as well. Now, enter Moss. They can spin up a group. They can drop in the Carbon Farm Network accounting for the group, and the group can be this group can be joined by different producers and consumers inside the ecosystem. They can use the Carbon Farm Network tool that's inside that group, and they can use the chat that's provided by it, and the component parts can be mixed and matched. They can use the video chat for it. Like, the functionality is assemblable for that group without having to have a big software company build all of the parts that you need to create a real application. So you end up having this whole social context, the social grouping, with all of the power of the apps being able to be mixed in. I hope that's I'm trying to give a rich example of how it would be useful. And so, because you have spreadsheets, you can also drop in a spreadsheet where you might need a spreadsheet to calculate something that should be then made visible as an end entry point into one of the fields of the accounting. Or you could refer to it and say, here's the spreadsheet that I got this from, and it's all in that space. It's a big flip in how you can do this. It's bespoke. And the other thing it does is it allows people to focus on, so like right now, what is ending up happening is that many companies that are trying to provide a service end up being a software company, because they need to provide that service online. So they have to have an IT department that built an app for them, that built this for them. And their IT department gets really big and they become a software company, and they can't really deliver on their own value because they're building software to do this stuff. And it makes sense that you do want a company to build a little tiny piece of software that embodies the value that that company can create. But that's doable with a small team. It's not doable to run a whole DevOps team and pay a lot of money to Amazon or to one of your cloud companies to host your stuff. And it's like that's, and have a DevOps shop to make sure that you can deliver it. Like that's hard to do. But it's not so hard to create one little tool that you could drop in. I mean, and it's similar. The analogy is perfect, right? It would be hard to be a publishing company when you had to have printing presses and editors and all this stuff to be able to produce a whole pile of stuff. You would actually send something to a publishing company to create magazines and do that. It became easy to become a publishing company. All you needed was somebody who had a copy of Dreamweaver and who could type a few things in. So then that cost goes to zero. You can bring the complexity in-house, and every place has somebody who's working on their website, some degree of it. And then it gets complicated. It turns into a software project. You can no longer do it. So that's the part, because especially where you create a social group around your business, your customers. So I think the Weave will also make it easy for people to have social groups for their business that they can bring people into and have different types of interactions with them without having to have a whole software company being able to build all of those extra pieces that make that go. So this part is not done, right? That part will evolve as we use it, as we see it being used. And I'm just doing the analogy of what happened with the web to show how that might go. Well, I would call it early alpha. It's totally usable. It's not polished. So like all of the things that we have come to expect will work certain ways doesn't always work that way in MOS, in part because the architecture is different. And so there are some costs that you pay when you move from centralized to decentralized technology. And one of those costs is that the way Holochain works is it's synchronizing with all of the other devices to be able to pull the data that it needs. That takes a little bit longer than going to one central server and pulling all the data back. And so getting that optimized to have the user experience that we expect to have when we're used to having centralized stuff, it can feel a little janky sometimes. You just ran the MOS and you saw it said synchronizing with peers. And I'm like, okay, how long is this going to take? And it took what? 30 seconds. So what's the stage? Well, it had like the underlying technology of Holochain has not matured enough so that those kinds of optimizations are really finely tuned. The web is so well optimized. Like if you're downloading data, it's optimized to the degree that it's coming from local servers, and there's all kinds of stuff that's been done to make things happen really quickly. It will happen, and it will happen even better, actually, interestingly, when you have this kind of distributed tech to make it work. But before that happens, there's some hurdles to get over. And then also the little tools that we built, the sample tools that we built, they're also all young, right? They don't have all the features. But a friend who was talking about this said, oh, wow, this is better than the free stuff, but freer than the paid stuff. So the paid stuff, it's, people have put in millions of dollars to get every pixel in the right place and fill out all the features. We haven't done that. But because it's an environment where you can drop so many things into it, it already feels more powerful than all the things that are just free that you might have for some of them. Like, so for example, and then speaking to what stages it at, the Kanban board software that we've written, we use it ourselves all the time. MOS itself is project managed inside our Kanban tool. And is it as feature rich as Trello? No. But does it have all the basic things you need, checklists and check marks and being able to drag everything wherever you want to drag it, and more because you can transclude into it? So it has more and a little bit less, right? At the same time. It doesn't have all the integrations. We're not with your Trello card is not integrated with your GitHub repo and all the rest of the stuff, because that's another world and it will take longer to create that kind of stuff. The main thing we want right now is many people who would find this useful to be using it so that it can be co-developed into the most usefulness for the most number of groups and types of groups. Like, what's missing? How is this complicated? How could this be easier? What tools should we be saying? Who wants to build these tools? What is the value that your group can provide to this, that it would work if you could have this built? And does it make sense for you to, instead of hiring a web developer to build you this kind of app, would you want to do it in MOS and the Weave? Like that, where we're at right now is, yes, we want the expansion of people building tools to add to groups, and also just see with what's already there. There's like probably, when I go to the tool library right now, it's what are there, 12 apps, 13, 14 apps, and there's more. There's probably more like 15 different apps that cover a different gamut of things, but there will be hundreds. What happens when you drop the cost of a capacity to zero? What happens in general? What the web did by creating a open capacity for doing content sharing, one that was not limited to large centralized corporations, is it completely released innovation and creative thinking. And so think about all the ways in which we can do content sharing now that we couldn't do content sharing before. YouTube, Wikipedia, Twitter, Facebook, these are all forms of content sharing that were able to happen because you had the web that is as an underlying capacity that's there. So all kinds of content sharing became possible because that basically entered into a kind of Cambrian explosion of content sharing, where you have this evolution of an experimentation in the realm of, oh, we can do content sharing like this. We can have Tumblr, and so you go through this evolution of all these different forms of content sharing. And of course, what we got to is that the most important kind of content sharing to do is content sharing inside of a community, inside of a social context of some frame or another, or a social group, right? That's the kind that became important. So what happens when you make social grouping free? The same thing. A huge and rapid evolution of the forming of different social group types and grouping together and collaborating together, because that's no longer limited by whatever the platforms say you must do to capture the value inside that platform. That value being captured by advertising because you become the product, that value because they capture your money. So what happens? The capacity to collaborate goes through the roof and gets experimented with, just around collaboration around specific things. Collaboration around content creation, collaboration around personal development, collaboration around technical development, collaboration, the social context. There will be all kinds of growth, I believe, because of it. It's systemic. Just look at the pattern. It's going to happen. It has to happen. That's what happens when you do this. So first is the growth, the explosion of a Cambrian explosion of collaboration. Like I'm using this like the tight kind of collaboration around specifics, but much more exciting to me is the explosion of types of social fabric, weaving together those different forms of collaboration, because now we have that capacity to do this thing that humans just love to do, which is create different types of social games, make up the rules for those games and play by them. Whether it's an actual game like soccer, or whether it's a game like status, and now I'm fancy and I'm wearing this clothes and I'm in fashion, which is beautiful. It's awesome. And we create these games that we play by, and they create value for us. First of all, they create real value for us. So like collaboration is how we create the value of necessity of our meeting our basic needs. So to me, that's one of the most exciting thing, is being able to create the context and the spaces for meeting our basic needs because of upgrading our capacity to collaborate together. Right. And then there's all the other things that I don't even know that we will do